for Mr. Nodada and Estelle. Kindly confirm that we have enough members can start the meeting.
Good morning, Chairperson. Good morning, honorable members. Good morning, Dr. Mbava and colleagues. Chairperson, we have more than enough members. Currently, we have 7 members. Only 2 are still outstanding so far. So the Chairperson can start the meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Nodada. Once again, a very good morning to all the colleagues, honorable members, the Chairperson and Commissioners of the Financial and Fiscal Commission, the support staff of the committee, and all in attendance. Welcome back, honorable members, from your recess. Our work has now started, and I hope all of you have used the time. I know it was difficult. We were on the ground doing the elections campaign, but I know and I hope that all members are ready. The purpose of today's meeting, colleagues, is to receive and consider the the Financial and Fiscal Commission's 2027-28 Division of Revenue submission. This engagement is one of the important part of Parliament's preparation for the forthcoming budget and Division of Revenue process. Colleagues, we know that Section 214 of the Constitution requires that revenue raised nationally be divided equitably among the national, the provincial, and the local spheres of government. In determining this division, consideration must be given to factors such as the national interest, the provision of basic services, developmental needs, the fiscal capacity, the economic disparities, and the need for stable and predictable allocations. In terms of Section 220 of the Constitution and the Financial and Fiscal Commission Act of 1997, the Commission, colleagues, is an independent institution mandated to advise Parliament and other organs of state on financial and fiscal matters. The Intergovernmental Fiscal Relations Act of 1997 regulates the process for determining the equitable revenue, the division of revenue, while the Money Bills Amendment Procedure Act and Related Matters Act of 2009 as amended assigns the committee responsibility for considering and reporting on the division of revenue bill once it is referred to the National Council of Province. Today, colleagues and honorable members, the engagement should assist this committee in assessing whether the resources are allocated equitably and sustainably across the 3 spheres of government. Members will also seek clarity on the affordability and practical implementation of the Commission's recommendations, as well as the government's response to recommendation and made in previous years. Mr. Nodada, can I get an indication from your good self if the 2 members that are not in the meeting have submitted their apologies, and check with honorable members if there's any apologies from their side?
Good morning, Chairperson. Once again, no, Chair, we have not received apologies from the 2 members that have not joined the meeting so far. If I may, Chair, I'm not sure if it's the appropriate time. The apology that we received is from the Deputy Minister, Sarupen. From the administrative side, we received 2 apologies from Mr. Majosi. He's on an oversight, and Tandi is booked off sick until this coming Thursday. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Nodada. We wish a speedy recovery. I hope the apologies are noted. Any apologies from the honorable members? I know sometimes we skip them and they would send messages on the side that they need to leave the meeting earlier. No indication of apologies. Let me now take this opportunity and award the FFC. Honorable Khadebe.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson. Good morning, everyone on the platform. I'm concerned about the apology of Deputy Minister, because I think that he had been regularly absent to come as a designated DM to come and deal with these issues of the land of the DORA. I think it's high time now that we raise the consent, in particular with the minister. that we expect the Deputy Minister to come and lead the team here. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Khadebe. I think the point has been noted and will be taken into consideration. Colleagues, allow me to now invite Dr. Mbava, as she's leading the team of the FFC, to introduce the delegation and proceed with the presentation of the day. Over to you, Dr. Mbava.
Yes,
and
thank you so much.
welcome once again.
Thank you so much, Chairperson Lekwase, for this invitation. And good morning to yourself, and good morning to all the honorable members of the committee and to all colleagues who are on the platform. Chair, I am accompanied by commissioners who might be on the platform or still going to join. And I'm also accompanied by the research team of the Financial and Fiscal Commission, who will also assist me with the presentation. Chair, I think you have covered quite well the reason for our submission today. In terms of Section 9 of the Intergovernmental Fiscal Relations Act, the Commission is required to submit its recommendations at least 9 months before the start of the 2027 financial year. That is why we table the submission now. Our recommendations must be on the table, Chair and members, before we kickstart the budget process. The research team can fly to the slides and then the focus on the summary of the chapters. In this year's submission, Chairperson, our submission is built essentially on one test only. And that is a question that we're asking. Does the budget promote transparency, accountability, and effective management of public debt? So each of the 5 chapters that we're going to interrogate today applies that test to different pressure points within the fiscal framework. So chapter 1, we call it fiscal transparency and the budget process, because transparency is not optional. It is a constitutional requirement under Section 215. And here we assess how well the current budget process meets that standard. Because credible budgets depends on Parliament, and also the public must be able to follow the money. After that, we look at Chapter 2, which is a very important issue, the issue of government guarantees and fiscal sustainability. Government guarantees, Chairperson and members, you will know that these are contingent liabilities, debt that does not appear on the balance sheet until it materializes. And we have seen in the last few years that it does actually come to the fore. So we're going to look at issues of full disclosure and also a tighter criteria on how guarantees are interrogated and how we can ensure that these guarantees stop eroding the fiscal space, essentially. And then the other issue, Chair, that is critical and that is threatening our fiscal environment and fiscal sustainability is the issue of ghost workers and the public sector wage bill. So every rand that is paid to a non-existent worker, essentially paid to a ghost worker, is a rand diverted from frontline service delivery. So strengthening the payroll verification protects then the integrity of the wage bill, because this is the largest single item in our consolidated spending, the public sector wage bill. We also, Chairperson, look at the provincial equitable share and the local government equitable share. We look at the formulas and we assess whether these formulas in 2026, are they fair in terms of the data that is feeding them, that is informing them? Are they outdated? are they accurate? So are we having the right inputs into the formula to inform the allocations? That is what we are asking in this chapter. So we look at issues of the data quality that goes into the formula, and we recommend improvements so that these allocations actually track what is happening on the ground. And then our last chapter, Chair and members, we look at the Intergovernmental Fiscal Relations transfers and the local service delivery. Transfers that we make, the equitable share, it does indeed reach the municipalities. But the question then is whether it is actually converted into service delivery on the ground. So we question that link between stronger intergovernmental governance and where the money is flowing and what delivery actually means, what is happening on the ground. So those are the 5 chapters then that essentially ask whether in our budget process we are indeed having transparency and that our budget process is delivering what the public wants to see in terms of trust. We'd like now to hand over to the research team to take us through the slides. Thank you so much. I'll come towards the end. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. And if we could move to the next slide, please, Nair. And a very good morning to the Honourable Chairperson and Honourable members and colleagues on the platform. To contextualise the FFC's annual submission, just to take you through a few contextual slides. Here, we see the socioeconomic profile of provinces, especially in terms of population. Here, just to highlight, the table shows mid-year population estimates, and we compare the 2022 census data to the mid-year estimates of 2025. And we also show the changes. And this is important. It filters down to various fiscal indicators, spending, as well as the formulas of the equitable share. So we see that the provinces with the most population gains include the Northwest Province, as well as Gauteng. And then we see a few marginal gains in the Western Cape, Free State, and the Northern Cape. And the distribution of the country's population by province is shown in the figure, the map on the right-hand side, showing that Gauteng is the most, continues to be the most densely populated province, followed by KZN and the Western Cape. Next slide, please. Also, in terms of unemployment or employment, the slide here just provides an overview of employment outcomes by province, also demonstrating year-on-year changes from the first quarter of 2025 relevant to the first quarter of 2026. And we show on the far right column, we show the employment to unemployment ratio for 2026. And we see that the Western Cape has the highest ratio of 4.1. Now, honourable members, just to explain this and how to interpret this, this essentially means that for every 4 people employed, there's roughly 1 person unemployed. Or stated differently, for every 100 people employed in the province, there are approximately 24 unemployed in the Western Cape. Another example here, the Free State has the lowest ratio of 1.6, meaning that essentially that for every 16 people employed, apologies, for every 100 people employed, there are roughly 61 unemployed. So what we see is higher incidence of unemployment across provinces, highlighting stark spatial disparities, particularly in terms of unemployment in this figure. Next slide, please. Briefly, the provincial fiscal overview. Here, the figure just demonstrates that the fiscal framework of the provinces is essentially comprised of 2 components. We have the transfers on the one hand, and then we have provincial own receipts, which we know are very limited due to provinces' limited taxation powers. The figure shows that the extent of reliance, therefore, on national transfers is very high. Although the figure highlights provinces that receive the most transfers, here we see Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal, and those that receive the least, here we see Northern Cape and Free State. Provincial own receipts, while very small in comparison to transfers, we do see is the highest in Gauteng at 8.3 billion. Next slide, please. Then, just in terms of the transfers components, to contextualize here, the figure highlights the allocation by the, on the one hand, the provincial equitable share relative to conditional grants across different provinces. In totality for 2026-27, the transfers amounted to 810 billion approximately, with the PES making up the bulk of that, constituting approximately 82% on average across transfers to provinces. On the following slide, not to go into detail, honourable members, but important to highlight guarantee exposure to SOEs, does briefly contextualize what follows later. One thing to highlight here, if we focus in on Eskom, of course, still has the largest share of contingent liabilities in terms of government guarantees, and persistently shows high exposure, which we know poses a significant fiscal risk. Worth noting is the increase in the guarantee. If we look at the Trans-Caledon Tunnel Authority, this increased from 35.5 billion in 2024-25 to 60.9 billion in 2025-26. And similarly, we see a very high increase for Transnet across those two financial years, where Transnet guarantee increased from approximately 50 billion in 2024-25 to a substantial increase of 196.3 billion. So those are just two things to note, honourable members. Here, in terms of some national challenges, which are important for contextualizing the scope of the Commission's research, unemployment continues to be a key bottleneck in hindering inclusive growth in South Africa. And the recent data shows between the final quarter of 2025 and the first quarter of 2026 that the unemployment rate did increase from 31% to 32%. And this is the official unemployment rate, not including discouraged workforce. We also highlight the extent of the reliance on social grants, which do offer a lifeline for over 25 million South Africans, approximately 40% of the population. However, it does raise concerns over the extent of poverty, and highlighting the severe challenge of socioeconomic inequality in the country. The table on the right-hand side just shows the grant beneficiaries, so the dependency on different types of grants, noting that the child support grant is by far the most relied on. And then briefly in terms of health and education, we just at a very high level, honourable members, note the extreme reliance on the public healthcare system of 84% of the population approximately, and the delay in the implementation in the National Health Insurance. In terms of education, we do note concern that 3.6 million South Africans over the age of 20 are classified as functionally illiterate. There, the qualification being that they have not completed grade 7 schooling, and that there's also a lack of youth aged between 7 and 24 that are currently enrolled in educational institutions. Next slide, please. Almost at the end of the context, briefly, just audit outcomes. Nationally, the 2024-25 audit outcomes show quite little improvement in terms of addressing governance failures and financial mismanagement of resources amidst weak accountability. And this is especially in pivotal service delivery entities. So the slide here refers to 161 high impact auditees, and these are essentially responsible for managing approximately 2 trillion rand of public funds. Yet we do see that material irregularities persist amidst weak contract management, irregular and wasteful expenditure, procurement challenges, and weak consequence management. And then on the following slide, at the local government level, the findings show that only 15% of municipalities received clear audits, a very low figure. 35% are in good financial health, and that 78% of the audited infrastructure projects face delays of over 2 years on average. Unfunded mandates, apologies, are also very prevalent, and it's concerning also that we just note there that the performance in metros in terms of audit outcomes have appeared to be deteriorating compared to previous years. Honourable members, I'll now turn to the research and recommendations that the Commission has made, Chapter 1. So on the following slide, Chapter 1 of the submission deals with the evaluation of fiscal transparency of the budget process from a constitutional perspective. On the following slide, please, as a point of departure and as alluded to by our chairperson, Section 2151 of the Constitution states explicitly that budgets of all spheres of government must promote transparency, accountability, and the effective management of the economy, debt, and the public sector. So what this research did was we selected fiscal indicators that we could use to quantitatively give insights into whether the budget process and the budget itself gives effect to these principles. And important to note that the selection of these fiscal indicators were well informed by the literature. For instance, fiscal transparency in the context of the budget process is not only about full disclosure in a timely and systematic manner, but beyond this, it also demands that the quality of the information published is accurate and credible so that it can be relied on. So the figure that you see here, we use the fiscal indicator of the forecast of growth of GDP by the National Treasury, and then we compared that forecast to those of the IMF and the SARB to get a cross-institutional comparison and to give insights on where our budget, our public budget sits relative to others. So the key takeaway here is that we see this trend that National Treasury's forecast reveal a pattern of systematic over-optimism in its growth forecasts compared to its peer institutions. On the following slide, just to continue in this vein, we looked at further years or so, and so the same exercise was extended, and the findings continue to show this upward bias. What this suggests is that the forecasting model underpinning the budget may be informed by unrealistic or incredible assumptions. And this then compromises the quality of information provided in the budget. We do, of course, recognize that these forecasting mechanisms are highly technical and nuanced, so a degree of deviation must be acceptable. However, this concern that the research brings to the forefront is that we see a consistent trend over the years. And this can be improved by independent validation mechanisms and more rigorous parliamentary oversight. Moving to the following slide, also part of this analysis, just to give the honourable members another fiscal indicator that was used in this research. And this was essentially the size of adjustment budgets, because a credible and transparent budget is one where initial allocations are reliable, which minimize the need for significant spending adjustments. So this is important, especially in line with the one aspect of the 215 principle, is that the budget must promote the effective financial management of the economy and debt. And this is undermined or can be undermined by unpredictable, volatile spending. I won't go into all of those years for each of the votes, but just to highlight that the public enterprises vote shows the most volatile, although it's not the only one with volatile spending adjustments under the period of review. The key takeaway, honourable members, is that the recurrence of such substantial deviations and the persistent need for debt bailouts not only evidence weak operational capacity and financial stability, which negatively impact service delivery, but also signal a degree of systemic failure in fiscal planning and budgeting. So while we note and recognize that the institutional framework regulating the budget process is robust, there are significant shortfalls in budget execution, reliability of information, and the credibility of spending, which then impede the goal and realization of Section 215 principles. And this is why the Commission recommends that the budget process is strengthened through parliamentary oversights and mechanisms such as independent validation to hold the budget process to the standard of the Constitution. Honourable members, I'll hand over to my colleague Neo to take you through the next chapter. Thank you very much.
Good morning, Honourable Chair, and also honourable members and colleagues on the platform. So I will be taking you through the next two chapters of our submission. So in chapter 2, basically the focus is on evaluating the impact of government guarantees on fiscal sustainability and transparency, as it was highlighted by my previous colleague. So as a way to begin this chapter, we realized that, the research shows us that there is a need to incorporate guarantees into fiscal planning and budgeting processes more effectively. So that what the Commission recommends is that the National Treasury must strengthen oversight over government guarantees by establishing a real-time centralized tracking system. This system should continuously update and disclose all guarantees and contingent liabilities within the budget documentation and fiscal risk reporting. In that, such measures will enhance transparency and reinforce Parliament's oversight obligations in managing the fiscal risk. So as a way to begin with, when you look at the figure, as illustrated on the figure on the slides, we see that government guarantees and contingent liabilities have grown steadily due to frequent fiscal interventions and structural weaknesses in our SOEs. They further reached a high of 663 billion and 1.2 trillion in 2025-26 respectively. In terms of growth, the data further shows two sharp increases between 2012 and 13 and 2015 and 16. And in that, growth was largely driven by escalating financial distresses of SOEs, particularly Eskom and SAA, that led to government interventions in forms of expanded guarantees. However, consequently, we see that the continued reliance on guarantees as a support mechanism for structurally weak SOEs poses an ongoing threat to debt sustainability. The findings indicate that guarantees are generally only recognized when they are called, which obscures their true fiscal cost and delays policy responses. Moreover, our research evidence shows that guarantees are currently issued on an ad hoc basis without a consistent set of criteria procedures, therefore increasing fiscal risk and enabling discretionary, potentially politically driven decisions. The timing and mechanism through which they translate into budgetary expenditures, such as through adjustment to budget, special appropriations, or reallocation from contingency reserves, may not always be immediately transparent within the legislative process. Therefore, a guaranteed framework will ensure that when guarantees are called, the resulting payments are formally appropriated, recorded through the budget process, preventing off-budget spending, and ensure that all fiscal commitments are properly authorized via the adjustment budget and special appropriations. Further into extending our analysis, we conducted a legislative analysis to identify some of the gaps in terms of how guarantees are how guarantees are handed over, or how in governing guarantees. So the findings show that the transparency of the budget in helping manage debt sustainability in accordance with Section 2151 of the Constitution is constantly under scrutiny, as the National Treasury only notes these commitments in Annexure Table 11 of the Budget Review without fully disclosing them in Chapter 7 as part of the fiscal risks, therefore concealing the real impact of these commitments on debt and fiscal sustainability. So this overall conceals the country's exposure to debt. The limited transparency and incomplete disclosure, however, does not only end there. We see that these guarantees directly undermine the principles embedded in Section 214, 1 to 2 of the Constitution, particularly in relation to the role of the Financial and Fiscal Commission. As guarantees, which constitute a significant portion of contingent liabilities, are not only integrated into the core fiscal risk reporting, the Commission is constrained in its ability to assess the true extent of government financial obligations. This weakens the Commission's ability to provide informed and credible recommendations, as the fiscal framework upon which the revenue sharing decisions are based becomes incomplete and potentially misleading. Moreover, the PFMA, when looking at the PFMA, our analysis shows that the PFMA in Section 40 remains ambiguous on transparent reporting of guarantee risks. The Act requires disclosure of contingent liabilities, but does not require the real-time disclosure of guarantee utilization, guarantee calls, guarantee restructuring, or forecasting of possible fiscal risks. So therefore, the ambiguity affects Parliament's oversight function and weakens accountability. In practice, this might mask the underlying financial strain in SOEs and delay remedial measures. So in the next slide, as part of our analysis, we did a guarantee risk matrix to try and check which guarantees actually were supposed to be accounted for as provisions. Like our chairperson said, the guarantees are only accounted for whenever they are called. However, there is a method that Treasury can try and use, which will also account for guarantees as provisions, ensuring that they're accounted for before they actually materialize. So the risk matrix, as you see on the table, provides a structured assessment of cumulative support, frequency exposure, likelihood of guarantee calls, and overall risk category. So here we see that Eskom stands out with 181 billion in cumulative support, very high exposure, and a critical risk rating, while SAAA follows with 48 billion and a similar critical profile. Other entities that we see here fall into severe risk category, reflecting repeated bailouts and high likelihood of further calls. So Sandral, Sasria, and Transnet are classified as elevated risks, where DBSA, SABC, and AXA remain relatively stable. The strategic implementation here is clear. Government guarantees must be treated as contingent liabilities with real fiscal consequences, not as off-balance sheet items. Stronger governance, accountability, and fiscal oversight of SOEs are essential to reduce reliance on bailouts and safeguard fiscal sustainability. So overall, the Commission's position is that the Commission recommends that recognizing these guarantees as provisions, strengthening oversight, and embedding proactive risk management into fiscal planning will ensure long-term stability of these SOEs. Moving to the next chapter. So in Chapter 3, we address the issue of ghost workers and the public sector wage bill and the implications for public finance. So as a point of departure, the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Public Service and Administration should jointly lead the integration and modernization of government payroll and human resource systems into a unified platform with biometric and video verification, digital identity, and real-time interoperability with database such as Home Affairs and South African Revenue Service. To enforce compliance, the Minister of Finance should link all funding, including conditional grants and intergovernmental transfers, to mandatory biometric registration, regular audits, and strengthened governance across all spheres of government and state-owned enterprises. The research findings indicate that the fragmented payroll system, weak information and communication technology controls, and limited interoperability with critical database creates significant opportunities for ghost workers to go undetected. Addressing these vulnerabilities requires an integrated system capable of real-time cross-verification of factors such as employees' identification, employee status, and banking details. Further, we see that the provincial data on the slide the provincial data showed persistent and uneven misalignment between funded posts and actual employment across provinces, with clear risk concentrations. In the pre-2010-2011 period, several large provinces recorded substantial positive variances, most probably the Eastern Cape, where actual headcounts exceeded the funded post in the ENE by 41,299 in 2009-10 and Gauteng, which recorded a positive variance of 30,972 in the same year. This early deviation suggests periods of rapid payroll expansion that outpaced budgetary controls. So from 2010-2011 onwards, the pattern shifts decisively with sustained and deepening negative variances dominating. Gauteng's variance deteriorated from 8,800 in 2010-2011 to 40,184 by 2018-19, while the Western Cape remained consistently below the funded levels between 17,000 and 36,000 employees. KZN followed a similar trajectory. Limpopo stood out as the most volatile province, recording an exceptional positive variance, followed by a rapid return to a large negative deviation, indicating episodic breakdowns in workforce and payroll controls. So overall, the data points to structural weakness in the provincial workforce planning, payroll governance rather than isolated or temporary anomalies. Persistent negative variances across most provinces suggest that approved personnel establishments are increasingly out of step with implementation capacity, undermining the credibility of the ENE as a planning and oversight tool. From a ghost worker risk perspective, early period positive variances in the province, such as the Eastern Cape and Gauteng, reflect heightened exposure to irregular payroll expansion, while post-2010-11 under execution of funded post creates an environment in which ghost workers may be concealed within inflated or poorly reconciled post-establishment figures rather than through excess headcounts. So on this slide, expanding further onto our analysis, we see that the South Africans PFM and also the payroll integrity efforts are managed through 3 separate initiatives, each with distinct goals, enhancing departmental accountability, enabling fraud, and promoting efficiency. So the DPSA framework formalized in September 2025 places legal responsibility on payroll integrity, on accounting officers, and mandating regular physical verification, robust integral controls, and strict consequences management. However, we see that the National Treasury's driven audit initiative seeks to leverage personal data, cross-reference with South Africa's Revenue Service, Department of Home Affairs, and banking records to detect anomalies like duplication identities, multiple bank accounts, and payments to deceased individuals. Further, we see that the GTech spending reviews are constrained by their exclusive fiscal design, which limits their capacity to identify ghost workers-related inefficiencies. The reviews focus on what government spends and how efficiently, rather than on verifying the legitimacy of individuals receiving those funds. And moving to our last slide. So the analysis here, in continuation with our recommendation, the analysis here shows that COE variance data over the period 2007 to 2018 points to persistent and deepening weaknesses in payroll and budget management. Over these 12 years, the variance repeatedly shifted between overspending and underspending. A clear turning point emerges in 2015 when the variance enters a prolonged period of underspending. So further, we see that this sustained shift from intimate surpluses over time to consistent underspending reflects showing growing problems in budget planning execution, with approved personnel budget increasingly disconnected from actual payroll outcomes. So most critically, the erratic and sizable COE variance patterns significantly elevate the risk of ghost worker fraud and broader financial mismanagement. Large amounts of funding are set aside for personnel but not clearly linked to verified staff, creating vulnerabilities in the payroll system. When expenditures does not closely align with confirmed headcounts and large variances are treated as routine, it becomes easier to conceal fictitious payroll entries. The volatility of the variances further obscures the distinction between legitimate forecasting errors and deliberate manipulation of personnel cost. Therefore, honorable members, as a result, ghost workers could remain embedded in the system, with warning signs masked by ongoing budget weaknesses and poor reconciliation processes, further leaving public finances exposed to leakages and abuse. That brings us to the end of the summary of this chapter, Honorable Chair and members. I'll hand over to my colleague Sabelo to continue with the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Neo. Good morning to you, Honorable Chairperson, and good morning to honorable members and colleagues present on the platform. I'll take you through the chapter 4 of our submission, and taking from the opening remarks of our chairperson, Dr. Mbava, on this chapter. She mentioned that the key issue here is the accurate, whether data that we do have, data that we do use on our provincial and local government could accurate. Why is this important? Is because both these formula, both the PS and the LES, they do rely mostly on the data, and that data determines how much each province and how much each municipality receives from the provincial and local government. And then key issues that we're addressing here, honorable members, are three issues. Firstly, is accuracy, relevance, and updatedness of the data that is used in the PS and LES. Secondly, we look again on a phase-in approach, because we've seen that the government uses a phase-in approach, particularly on the PS, where whatever should be implemented, where PS are determined by socioeconomic and such impacts. Hello?
You seem to have, I don't know if it's on my side, but you seem to cut a bit. You are allowed to switch off your video while doing the presentation. Maybe you might be more clearer. Thank you, sir. You may proceed. I'm sorry for disrupting you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I was saying the second part looks on a phase-in approach which is implemented by the government. Then the third part or the third issue is the increasing issue that we've realized, we've seen as a commission, that there's been an increase in the allocations that are made through the PS, but which are not determined by the PS formula. And then we believe that this again undermines the principles of a good intergovernmental fiscal system. Then those are three issues that we were focusing on. Okay, with respect to findings, this slide shows that what is happening here is that the study reveals that to determine allocations through the PS, what has been used by the government is an outdated information or outdated data. For example, what is happening here? Okay, first of all, let me start with the phase-in approach, because whatever is due to a province determined by the socioeconomic circumstances is implemented in a phase-in manner. It's not implemented fully in the first year. The intention here the government that uses is to fully apply the full impact in the third year or in the outer year of the MTF. Then this is the effect that we see in each province from the PS, because only 1/3 is implemented in the first year, and then the rest is implemented in the outer years of the MTF. And then by doing that, the government, again, at the end of the MTF year, then this is what provinces get. You could see here the difference, because if it was implementing the full impact by the third year, those bars that are stretching away, then should be coming close to zero. Then they shouldn't be stretching away if it was achieved. And over and above this, what we need to mention is that things do change, data do change, socioeconomic conditions do change year in and year in, while government is trying to catch up with what is supposed to have been allocated in that province. So this is over and above the yearly changes that government doesn't catch up in terms of allocating. Then the study again revealed that to determine allocation to each province, outdated information or outdated data is used in the formula. For example, in 2024, the formula used data from 2022 mid-year population estimate, since there was no data available for the mid-year from Status A. And then this challenge, again, is the biggest challenge, given that my colleague spoke about the high migration, the movement of people from one province to another. And then now, if we're using data that is outdated, and again, there's urbanization that we've seen, if we're using data that is outdated, then this deprives provinces. Okay, next slide. Okay, here, honorable members, what we are showing is that the second issue that I've spoken about, that there's been an increasing trend that we have observed of allocating funds outside the PS formula. Remember, for the PS formula, every funding that is allocated is determined by the formula. But now what we've observed as a commission is that there's been an increasing trend of funding a number of programs outside the PS formula. And then these findings now are showing that this has increased. For example, in 2017, you could see that there was one program that was funded outside the PS determinations. But this has increased significantly over the years. As we are in 2026 now, we can see that there's a total of 13 programs that are funded outside. And then now this undermines transparency and principles of the IGFR, of our IGFR, because anyway, there's no accountability here. You don't know how these programs are being funded, and there's an increasing number of these programs. And over and above that, it's not only about the number of programs that are being funded outside the PS formula, but also the quantum is increasing. Though it has decreased post-2023 a bit, but you could see that from 2021, it increased from 997 million and reached 7.5 billion in 2023. And again, what does this tell us? This increasing trend and then this increasing quantum, it shows that the government doesn't see anything wrong on allocating funds outside the PS formula, but this undermines transparency of our formula and of our intergovernmental fiscal system. Next slide. So here, honorable members, this slide focuses on the local government equitable share formula, because one of the key components is to fund municipalities based on the poverty levels. Then now what we see here is that the data that is being used in the LGS, local government equitable share, is as far back as 2011 census. Then it has not been updated. So while we are aware that poverty levels do change year in and year out, but the data that is being used is outdated, and then this deprives again municipalities, because some municipalities would gain. However, what we've seen over these years is that from 2009, there's been a decrease, in fact, in in poverty levels across provinces and across municipalities, with an exception of Gauteng, where there's been a slight increase in poverty levels. So now, if we are funding at the levels of 2021 census data, then we could say that provinces like other provinces would be gaining, while a province like Gauteng, which has increasing poverty levels, is one that will be deprived. And again, going deeper to municipalities, what we are showing here is that these levels, they do differ if you look at different metros. With the city of Tshwane at the end, highlighted in red, is one that is experiencing an increasing poverty levels by 2023 compared to 2029 or 2011. And then now, what does it mean? It means that city of Tshwane, for example, is being deprived by using an outdated data, which is from 2011 census data. So that's the message that we're communicating here. Next slide. I think, Chairperson and honorable members, this is a summary of our chapter on PS and LES review. Thank you very much. Through you, Chair, let me hand over to my colleague, Nosisa, to take us through chapter 5. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabelo. Good morning, Honorable Chairperson and honorable members. My name is Nosisa Kwama, and I'll be taking you through the last chapter of our submission. Next slide, please. So this chapter, honorable members, is about strengthening governance in intergovernmental fiscal transfers for effective local service delivery. So there are three key findings, honorable members, emanating from this chapter. So the first finding, we looked at the document and institutional analysis. And we look at the trade document, which is the 1998 White Paper on Local Government, the Section 71 reports of the Municipal Finance Management Act, and the Section 154 of the Constitution. If we look at the summary findings of the 1998 White Paper on Local Government Analysis, so the first finding is that the white paper established a strong vision for developmental local government and assumed municipalities would progressively build the capacity to manage increasingly complex service delivery demands. However, honorable members, our analysis shows that the white paper on local government relied largely on cooperative governance and voluntary coordination, without sufficiently specifying enforceable governance and accountability mechanism to manage implementation challenges. The findings also shows that a weak alignment between municipal planning, budgeting, integrated development plans, and intergovernmental fiscal transfers, combined with persistent capacity constraints and unclear institutional responsibilities. These weaknesses have contributed to fragmented service delivery. Key to note from these honorable members is that the challenge is therefore not the policy vision itself, but limited operationalization of governance mechanism to support implementation. And then if we look at the findings from the Section 71 reports, the analysis shows that the recurring underspending of conditional grants, particularly the infrastructure grants, this points to a mismatch between the grant design, municipal capacity, and the implementation timelines. So our findings, honorable members, further indicate that the transfers are often not aligned with municipality implementation readiness, reducing the effectiveness of fiscal transfers. Another important finding from this analysis is that the monitoring remains largely compliance-driven, focusing on expenditure rather than whether spending improves service delivery. Although Section 71 reports identify risk early, these warning signals do not consistently trigger coordinated or corrective action across spheres of government. Key to note here, honorable members, is that stronger governance arrangements are required to ensure monitoring leads to timely support and improved implementation. And then moving to our last document, which is the section 154 of the Constitution. This section of the Constitution provides the foundation for this study by requiring national and provincial governments to support us and strengthen municipal capacity. The analysis of this section of the Constitution shows that this provision promotes proactive support rather than reactive oversight and reinforces the principles of cooperative governance. Key to note here, honorable members, is that the analysis demonstrates that intergovernmental fiscal transfers should not be viewed simply as financial allocation, but as a broader governance and capacity building framework. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the key findings from the empirical analysis where the relationship between the intergovernmental fiscal transfers, service delivery efficiency, and municipal governance outcome were explored. The first finding is that the higher levels of intergovernmental fiscal transfers are not associated with audit outcomes. This suggests that simply allocating more funding does not strengthen municipal governance, financial management, or even internal controls. Secondly, the analysis also found that municipal funding levels are not determined by governance or performance indicators. In other words, honorable members, municipalities receiving larger transfers do not necessarily perform better than those receiving smaller allocation. The empirical findings indicated that larger fiscal transfers do not lead to measurable improvements in service delivery outcome. This demonstrates that funding alone is insufficient to improve municipal performance. Next slide, please. Then we also looked at the metropolitan municipality service delivery performance and spending efficiency. On this slide, honorable members, we examine the spending efficiency and service delivery performance of metropolitan municipalities, focusing on wastewater management expenditure. Metros are responsible for delivering essential services such as water, electricity, sanitation, and waste management. The financial performance of the metropolitan municipalities therefore has a direct impact on the quality of life of the millions of South Africans. One important observation from the finding is that strong expenditure performance does not necessarily translate to reliable service delivery. For example, honorable members, the city of Johannesburg recorded expenditure close to its adjusted budget, yet residents continued to experience prolonged water outages and supply constraints. The outcomes also shows variation across other metros. If we look at the Buffalo City and the Mangaung, they exceeded their adjusted budget, which may indicate under budgeting or unplanned cost escalations, while some metros spent substantially below their adjusted budget, suggesting implementation challenges and weaker spending capacity. Key to note from this slide, honorable members, is that high expenditure does not guarantee better service delivery. Effective outcomes require strong governance, coordinated planning, and implementation capacity in addition to adequate funding. I will pause here, Honorable Chairperson, and with your permission, I would like to hand over to my chairperson for final remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nosisa. Honorable members, this slide is a summary of all our recommendations. Members can go through the recommendations, this slide, and the next slide, Nosisa. Onewo, the next slide as well. This is also a summary of our recommendations, and the full submission is also available on our website on the last slide, Newo. In closing, Chairperson, what does this mean, this submission? Essentially, what are we saying here? So what has run through this submission is that whether the subject is guarantees, or we are talking about ghost workers, or we are talking about the equitable share formula, the 5 chapters make one argument. Fiscal credibility is built on transparency. A budget the public cannot see and verify is a budget the public cannot trust. And trust is the real currency of the fiscal framework. Secondly, what are we asking of government? Our recommendations are not abstract. They ask for fuller disclosure of contingent liabilities, verified payrolls, credible data in the allocation formula, and transfers to the municipalities and to local government in general that convert into services on the ground. So each is practical. Each recommendation is practical. It is costed against evidence, and it is recommendations that are achievable within the 2027-28 framework. And then what is the road ahead from here? So this submission now enters the 9-month budget cycle. So we have now kickstarted that budget cycle through our recommendations. We will engage now with various stakeholders, including National Treasury, the provinces, organized local government, and other parliamentary committees at every stage of the budget process. We will track government's formal responses to each recommendation, and we'll follow through to make sure that these recommendations are considered. So the Commission's mandate is simple, to state what we require here is that an equitable sharing of national revenue for every sphere of government and every citizen. That is our mandate. So this submission, therefore, is our contribution towards that mandate for the 2027-28 financial year. And we recommend it to yourselves as Parliament, Chairperson and members, and we thank you, and we want to hand over back to you, Chair. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mbava and Team FFC, for such an insightful presentation. Colleagues, let me also acknowledge the presence of honorable members from provincial legislatures who are in attendance of our meeting today, and I also saw colleagues from the PBO are also in our meeting. Your presence is acknowledged, colleagues. And I'm now going to note the hands of honorable members that would like to take part and interact with the presentation. I see the hand of Honorable Siwisa, Honorable Nzo, and Honorable Ryder. I would also like to invite members. Honorable Swart will be the last members from the provincial legislatures. If they want to participate, they'll be given an opportunity to do so because Division of Revenue talks to their allocations as well. If they want to participate, you are more than welcome to do that. If you do not want to participate, it's still okay. After Honorable Swart, it will be Honorable Ngumalo, then Honorable Brett will be the last. But before giving to Honorable Siwisa, I have a few questions myself. I have noted that the region knows that South Africa's budget process does not yet fully align with Section 215 of the Constitution. Now, my question is, what specific legislative or procedural amendments does the FFC recommend to Parliament to enforce independent validation of fiscal data and to reduce these large adjustments so that the budget can meet the constitutional standard of transparency and accountability? On ghost workers and public sector bill, the Commission's research shows a persistent misalignment in the budgeted and actual headcount. Now, can the FFC tell this committee what the estimated fiscal leakage is from the ghost workers and payroll fraud nation? And what timeline and funding models does the FFC propose for the rollout mandatory biometric verification across all spheres of government to close this gap? My last question will just be a general question that we have noted that the national context presented, it shows an unemployment rising of 32.7% in Q1 of 2026, 26.5 million people on social grants, and 65% of municipalities that are classified as having concerning financial health, with 40.14 billion in irregular expenditure. Now, in light of this fiscal and socio-economic context, how should the division of revenue for 2027-28 be reprioritized to balance the fiscal sustainability with the urgent need for job creation and service delivery without further undermining the sustainability? These are my three questions. Honorable Siwisa, you are invited to engage the presentation.
No, thank you, Chair. Greetings, Chairperson, colleagues from Provincial Legislature, Madam Dr. Mbava and FFC, team, and the support staff. Chair, I would like to welcome the presentation and the recommendation that have been done by the FFC and their briefing and their recommendations pertaining to the matters that we're dealing with today. But Chairperson, I'm going to express that what Honorable I forgot the names now because it's been long since we met, but it's a great concern, Chair, because we are going to raise issues here and the Deputy Minister is not here. There are certain clarities that we need to address, and the Deputy Minister is not here, who is a designated person when it comes to matters that we are dealing with today. Chair, we cannot speak about ghost employees without speaking about lifestyle audit, because I think at some point the ghost workers that we are speaking about and the refusal of certain officials in departments, and I'm going to be specific with Northern Cape, where we found ourselves with 33 officials deciding that they are going to resign before the lifestyle audit could be made. So we can't speak about ghost workers and not speak about lifestyle audits of government officials. It's a pity that the Deputy Minister is not here. Maybe at some point the Minister of Labour should come to this committee and give us a clarity as to how they are dealing with the whole matters, because we can't speak about the other one hand and not speak about the other hand. In light of that, Chairperson, just apologies, Chair.
Yes, Honorable Siwisa.
Apologies, Chair. In light of that, the FFC has made a recommendation that there should be a proposed linking of conditional grants to the biometric compliances. How would the Commission prevent this approach from unintentionally disrupting frontline service delivery in provinces or municipalities that experience implementation delays? Another question, Chair, that I would put forward to the Commission is that we already see that several departments already conduct payroll verification exercises. What specific shortcomings have these existing initiatives failed to address, and why does the Commission believe a completely integrated platform is necessary? Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable Siwisa. Over to you, Honorable Ndlovu.
Good morning to you, Chair, and honorable members, and also all the members on the visual platform, Chair, and also good morning to Dr. Mbava and the team. Chair, I've got a few questions. One, on the fiscal transparency and budget process, Chair, the Commission argues that although South Africa possesses one of the strongest constitutional and legislative budget framework globally, fiscal transparency is undermined by persistent optimism in macroeconomic forecast, large as the adjustment budget, recurring bailouts of state-owned enterprises, and weakness in budget implementation. Chair, the Commission links large adjustment budget to weaken fiscal transparency. How does it distinguish between a legitimate response and unforeseen fiscal shocks and adjustment that reflects poor planning or weak expenditure management? Chair, on the governance guarantees and fiscal sustainability, my question, Chair, is the Commission identifies several SOEs as presenting critical fiscal risk beyond increased transparency. What measurable governance reform should accompany future guarantees to reduce government long-term exposures? Chair, the last one, Chair, on the ghost workers and public sector wage bill. I wish COSATU was part of this or also listening, because sometimes it also affects the workers. Remember, they are also affiliated to the unions, Chair. But the question on my side is the several departments already conducted payroll verification exercise. What specific shortcomings have this existing initiative failed to address, and why does the Commission believe a completely integrated platform is necessary? Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Honorable Ndlovu. Honorable Ryder.
Thank you, Chairperson. Good morning, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, and thanks to Dr. Mbava and the team for the presentation this morning, but more importantly, for the substantial work that went into preparing the underlying document. Now, the presentation that we've received today is very much I almost want to use the word superficial reflection of an underlying document that gives much more detail. And actually, it's a criticism of mine this morning that the presentation has been a little bit vague in certain aspects, but I understand that there's much more detail in that supporting document. And of course, we will go in and download that. It will take substantially more reading time than just the 30-odd pages that we saw today. As usual, Dr. Mbava, if there is a spare hard copy of that booklet, I always like to get a hard copy so that I can flip between, cross-reference, and then refer back to it. Your past one has formed part of my library in my office. So yeah, thank you for the work. Let's get into the actual contents, though, and I think that you know, as was pointed out, this is an important step in the preparation of the budget and the division of revenue. I'm not convinced by my colleagues' virtue signaling that the Deputy Minister's absence is massively problematic, because this is part of a process, and Treasury and the Deputy Minister and the Minister himself will be given a chance to respond in due course. I don't think we've ever had a Deputy Minister at one of these engagements, but let's not get into that side scuffle. Let's talk about the content, and first of all, the issue around guarantees. Now, guarantees are, of course, something that I often refer to as bailouts by stealth. I've used that phrase repeatedly over the years, and I think that that continues to be a concern for me. and I'm glad that it's been highlighted by the FFC. I certainly share your concerns about the ease with which these are passed, because effectively it is a bailout. It is an appropriation that is done through the back door, and it's something that I believe is substantially problematic. The FFC will note that there has been a private members bill tabled. There has been a private members bill tabled, which seeks to address this. Yeah, hopefully we can get some inputs at least, if not support for the private members bill, so that we can ensure that proper parliamentary processes are followed when guarantees are issued or increased going forward. In terms of the comment that was made around adjustment budgets being limited, etc. Chairperson?
I'm sorry for that, Mr. Ryder.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
You may proceed. I'm so sorry.
Thank you. No problem at all. So adjustment budgets are there for a specific reason. And I mean, the parliamentary process that underpins adjustment processes, adjustment budgets is substantial. And the reason for that is because adjustment budgets are taken seriously. So I'm not sure if there's more information in the underlying document, but the one or two instances that were highlighted on the slide, where substantial adjustment budgets have been made, don't point to a big concern for me specifically, because frankly, every now and then there does need to be a big step change in the way a department is running, or a big response to the way that spending or a specific program has taken traction. So yeah, and looking at the adjustments that were highlighted, I seem to recall that certainly from the communication department one, there was a very specific reason for that. It related to a delay in, it related to the auction of bandwidth, etc., if my memory serves me correctly. So I don't share the concern that the FFC highlighted based on the information that they showed us. But if there is additional information, please, bring it forward. But I do think the adjustment budget process is a rigorous one. It's not something that people just do, out of hand. And I don't believe it has been abused materially, certainly not based on the evidence that was brought this morning. In terms of the provincial equitable share, I found these slides to be a little bit vague. Slide 24 and 25 specifically, quite vague, and I do think that I need to go in and read much deeper into these issues. This phasing in of the provincial equitable share changes that was spoken about. I'd really like to get a lot more information about this phasing in. What are these changes? What are the impact? Does phasing in mean that it's just a case of smoothing out the bumps to ensure that a degree of predictability is kept in place? Or is it a case of just, deferring appropriate movement of funds? A lot of information there needed, and the comment about the fact that we're still relying on 2011 data in many instances, I think is more a reflection on Stats SA's failure with the last census than anything else. So that criticism needs to be aimed at the correct place, I guess. On a lighter note, the title slide for Chapter 5 I found to be very misleading. It was a photograph of the a highway intersection in Gauteng, and it was a nighttime shot, very pretty shot, but all the lights were working, and those lights haven't worked for over 2 years. So yeah. Chairperson, let's talk about this issue about synchronizing planning and budgeting, and it's an important discussion that's been held across many platforms. And I think that there has to be an acknowledgement that there are pros and cons towards synchronized budgeting and planning and the financial year ends across the three spheres. So while from an expenditure and certain financial aspects, it might be something worth looking into. I think there are other aspects to it that become quite difficult to manage, and certainly from the public engagement point of view, when you are having public outreaches and public participation about different budget mechanisms, and dealing with all three spheres of government at the same time, it really can become quite confusing to members of the public. But also, the limitations from the Auditor General. If you have one financial year in for all of the entities that you are accountable for, it may provide some capacity issues, and I think that a delayed audit is always a problem, because then by the time you're reporting on something, you're already well way through the next cycle, which then reduces the ability to address matters that were picked up in the previous one. So maybe if the FFC can just talk to those two issues as well, it would help me. And then my last point, Chairperson, 100% spending is not equal to service delivery. It's something that we've been saying for a very long time. Now, there's two issues here. The first is that 100% spending and only 50% of targeted outcomes being met is the one that we often deal with in Parliament, and of course cause for major concern. And that's why the clean audit aspect is so important, because clean audits seek to get rid of that specific issue, and so if you spend everything and account for it all properly, but you are not achieving your outcomes, then there needs to be a flag, and that's what a clean audit does. So that's the one comment I wanted to make. But the other part is the fact that we need to spend more time on BRRR processes across the spheres. Now, I know in local government it's called SDBIP, Service Delivery and Budget Implementation Plan. These processes need to be far more carefully considered, with much more attention given to the actual targets that are set, because that's essentially what it is. It's a promise of, if you give me this budget, I will follow these steps so that we achieve the ultimate outcome. And those steps are the things that are put out in an annual performance plan or in an SDBRP. And making sure that those steps are going to get us to that final mark is something that requires far more focus from politicians and members of the public, civil society, and of course entities like the FFC. Thank you again. I'm done, Chair.
Honorable Swart.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairperson. And thank you very much for all the presentation. Just a couple of questions from my side. On the first one, it's on fiscal transparency. The Commission concludes that Parliament's oversight is weakened because optimistic economic forecasts repeatedly influence revenue projections and expenditure decisions. Can you identify specific instances over the past 5 years where these optimistic assumptions directly resulted in poorer fiscal outcomes? And what legal mechanism should Parliament introduce to hold institutions accountable when those forecasts prove materially inaccurate? The second question is on adjustment budgets. At what point does the repeated use of adjustment budgets cease to be responsible fiscal management and become evidence of weak planning and weak financial discipline. The question is, has the Commission developed objective indicators Parliament can apply every year? On SOEs, Chairperson, Parliament has approved guarantees for many state-owned entities over several years. Yet, governance failures persist. Should future guarantees automatically expire unless measurable governance reforms are achieved? And should Parliament insist on mandatory performance conditions before any guarantee is renewed? And also on the Eskom Transnet's guaranteed exposure has increased dramatically while operational performance remains weak. At what stage does continued government support become fiscally irresponsible? And has the Commission quantified the long-term risk to taxpayers if current trends continue? On the topic of ghost workers, the Commission recommends biometric verification. Has the Commission estimated how much money government could realistically save annually if ghost workers were eliminated? And which departments present the highest fiscal risk? Provincial equitable share. If updated census data more accurately reflects where people live today, does continuing to phase in outdated allocations not amount to knowingly distributing public funds inequitably? How does the Commission reconcile this section or this with section 214 that speaks to equitable shares of the Constitution, section 214? Conditional grants continue to grow despite persistent underspending by provinces. Has the Commission considered recommending that consistently underperforming provinces lose future grant allocations in favor of provinces with proven implementation capacity? The unconsequent management, Chairperson, throughout the submission, the Commission identifies governance failures, poor planning, and weak accountability. Can the Commission identify a single area where stronger consequence management alone could generate greater fiscal savings than introducing new funding? And this, an overall question on all the chapters, across all 5 chapters. The Commission repeatedly identifies weak implementation rather than weak policy as governance biggest failure. And in your view, is South Africa's fiscal crisis primarily a funding problem or an accountability problem? And if accountability is the real problem, what should Parliament stop doing differently from next year? That is all from my side, Chairperson. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Swart. Honorable Ngumalo.
Thank you very much, Chair, and my humble greetings to your good self and other honorable members present here and also the FFC. Chairperson, thank you very much for affording us this opportunity. I want to first acknowledge the presentation by FFC, assisting us to know what's happening inside our pockets as the government. Chairperson, my first question is on the fiscal transparency and the budget processes. Chair, sorry. The Commission leaked large adjustment budget to weaken fiscal transparency. How does it distinguish between legitimate responses to unforeseen fiscal shock and adjustment that reflect poor planning and weak expenditure management? That is my number one. Number two, Chair, Parliament has already exercised oversight through Division of Revenue Bill, Appropriation Bill, MTBPS, and Adjustment Appropriation Bill processes beyond the existing legislative mechanism. What additional oversight powers or reform does the Commission believe Parliament still need to strengthen budget oversight credibility? That's my two questions, Chair. I move to the next chapter, which look at the issue of government guarantee and fiscal sustainability. Sorry for that. In terms of our SOE chairperson, we know that we are always having a challenge of SMME that are collapsing, but the Commission identifies several SOE as presenting critical fiscal risk. Chair, beyond increased transparency, what measurable governance reform should accompany future guarantee to reduce government's long-term exposure? That is my number one. Number two, has the Commission assess whether repeated guarantee create moral hazard? And if so, what safeguards should Parliament insist upon before approving future support? Chair, these are my questions. I think that one of Ghost Workers I'm covered by the Honourable. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Numalo. Honorable Brett.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson. Good morning all to everybody on the platform and to all our colleagues. It's good to be back in committee. Thank you very much for the FFC for the presentation. Once again, it contains a lot of information, and I think too much information to cover in one set of questions. So I'll most probably will also raise some written questions hereafter. Also on the question of the Deputy Minister that's not present, I've checked the agenda. I don't see that the Deputy Minister was required to respond to the FFC's presentation today, and I do believe that the Deputy Minister will have the opportunity to address us at a later stage where we can engage him. Madam Chair, I have two issues that I want to focus on today. The first is the state guarantees, and the second is the provincial equitable share. Now, coming to the state guarantees, according to me and according to my understanding, the PFMA gives the Minister wide discretion to issue guarantees, but contains no ceiling, no mandatory risk assessment criteria, and no ongoing monitoring frameworks. Now, the question is, does the Commission believe, or is it the Commission's standpoint, that these omissions expose the fiscus to unacceptable risk, and what should be done to address these in legislation? Furthermore, the figures that were presented to us show very large guarantee exposures, especially the significant increase in Transnet's guarantees and the continued exposure to Eskom. Now, it appears to me as if government guarantees are increasingly being used to compensate for delayed structural reform at SOEs, rather than addressing the underlying causes of financial distress. And I would like to hear the FFC's opinion on my statement and whether this is a fair observation. Thirdly, when we look at policy and legislative frameworks, now Section 70 of the PFMA gives the Minister broad discretion to issue guarantees, but contains little guidance on risk assessment or reporting. Now, in the FFC's view, what specific legislative amendments to the PFMA should Parliament prioritize to address these shortcomings? Coming to fiscal sustainability, the FFC knows that guarantees can quickly become direct public debt. Now, I agree with that. Has the FFC estimated the level at which South Africa's contingent liabilities begin to pose a material threat to fiscal sustainability? Because there must be a threat to fiscal sustainability. But what I want to know is how close are we to that risk level if the FFC has determined that risk level? Also on the same topic, should South Africa establish a contingency reserve specifically to provide for potential guarantee calls? We know there's an ongoing risk that guarantees can be called up. And are there international examples that support such an approach of contingency reserve in such instance? Then we come to the SOE portfolio, and that's also concerning. Government has become overly reliant on guarantees as a substitute for fundamental governance and operational reform at SOEs. Is that a fair comment? I would like to hear the FFC's opinion and advice on that. Then, coming to future reform, the Honourable Rider already referred to the private members' bill before Parliament. But beyond the guarantee framework, what additional institutional reforms would most improve South Africa's management of contingent liabilities? Because it is clear that we urgently need reforms to manage these liabilities. And then lastly, on the topic of state guarantees, if I understand correct, the figures before us in the slides show that government constitutes to carry hundreds of billions of rand in contingent liabilities. Now, on the other hand, the FFC warns that the current framework lacks adequate safeguards. And I would like to know, in the view of the FFC, what is the single most important reform that we as Parliament should insist upon during this budget cycle to ensure that government guarantees support economic growth without exposing future generations to unsustainable fiscal risk? And then, of course, to limit further borrowings in this regard. Coming to my last focus point today, and that is the provincial equitable share. And my gripe is payments outside the PES formula. Now, the slide shows that there is an increased tendency to make payments to provinces outside the PES formula. And that is hugely concerning because it is difficult for provinces to precisely predict or precisely to know how the PES formula will be applied in future. What is the FFC's position on payments to provinces outside of the PES's formula? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Brett. Colleagues from provinces, do you have any input or any submission, any seeking question? With the absence of hands on honourable members, I think we are all covered. Dr. It's now your turn to respond to member submissions. You and your team, thank you.
Thank you so much, Chair. Let me appreciate all the questions and all the comments. Honourable Rider, we will, as soon as we have the hard copies, we'll send you a copy as well. The slide 5, the highway, the lights not being there, I think we want those lights. Whatever is not working on the roads should be working because we allocate the money. So that is the ideal picture of what things should look like. But I accept the lightheartedness of the response. Chair and members, the research team who worked extensively on the submission, They have all the answers that you want, so I'm going to give them the opportunity to answer those technical questions. Chen, over to you and the team.
Well, thank you, Chair, and my deepest gratitude to the Honourable Chair members for such poignant questions asked. I'm going to let my team to first respond, and then I'll come up at the end. Over to you, Jenny.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the honourable members and chairperson for the questions. To touch on some of the questions relating to the chapter on fiscal transparency in the budget process, there were a few questions around the legislative mechanisms, the one specifically relating to how to ensure independent validation mechanisms. Here, just to note, we observe a top-down approach in the public budgeting process. And for additional context, a part of the chapter's research that isn't presented in the slide, more details found in the looking at the reforms over the MTEF and what those Treasury reforms say. But what's a key takeaway is that a top-down approach can undermine the role of public participation in the budget and compromise the role of stakeholders in providing inputs to help shape the budget. And what the research recognizes is that there is a robust legislative and policy framework already supporting transparency through this public participation process. And importantly, relevant for independent validation mechanisms, there is already a legislated mechanism supporting the engagement of the FFC itself in the budget process. Under the Intergovernmental Fiscal Relations Act, the FFC's role here is cemented in the budget process. And what the recommendations of this chapter suggest and speak to is that as an independent constitutional body, the FFC is suited to assist with, for instance, independent validation during its already legislated prescribed process in participating in the budget. So the research speaks to giving effect, giving more meaning to these already legislated options that are there. Then moving to adjustment budgets, there were a few questions around there, noting Honourable Ryder's concerns, and to give a little bit more detail from the research itself, and what you'll find in the submission is that there is agreement that there is this role of adjustment budgets that is important, and that the adjustment budget itself, a deviation cannot in itself and alone be an indicator of poor fiscal planning. As stated by the honourable members, there is an important purpose. What the research sought to highlight through its analysis is that it's when the issue arises, when the deviations don't appear to be once-off in response to an unforeseen event that arises, and that is duly accommodated for. But when the deviations arise, and what we see in many cases, year after year, and this is what raises concern for the FFC in the context of using adjustment, the deviation and size of adjustment budgets as a fiscal indicator, which may reduce transparency or at least hinder transparency to some extent. So we absolutely recognize that a once-off adjustment is not enough evidence to suggest poor transparency. But the important element that's also just responding to the further comment by an honourable member on this is that the important part is to look at how often it occurs and whether it occurs with the same vote over time. One of the issues raised specifically here, also just to give a bit further information that wasn't discussed in the slide, is regarding the communications, telecommunications, and postal services votes. So we noted that the communications vote was discontinued after 2019, and telecommunications and postal services, the postal services operated from 2015 to 19, and that we saw some patterns, while less extreme than public enterprises, that did raise some concerns regarding the effectiveness of fiscal planning and departmental coordination. So again, honourable members, the transparency is a highly nuanced concept, and with concerns that come up, the research doesn't say it's completely not transparent, but it's about aiming to enhance transparency so that it can give full effect to the constitutional principle. And with regards to the communication, the analysis showed that there were significant upward deviations in the departmental budget in the years preceding the discontinuation of the vote. So it does surround questions, or raise questions rather, on what is the effective approach to fiscal restructuring and the continuation of fiscal spending. And again, in many cases, these can be completely valid, but then it also needs to be accompanied by perhaps more robust information explaining why this, for instance, a vote got a significant increase right before it was discontinued. So perhaps it's about more robust information being provided, explaining the reasons. And then just finally, there was a question on identifying specific instances where over-optimistic growth assumptions directly impacted fiscal outcomes. So here, honourable member, the research in this chapter didn't specifically look at a causality between over-optimistic growth projections. And this would definitely require a more detailed quantitative analysis establishing causality. However, what can be said and recognized is that the fiscal framework in the budget and the fiscal statistics presented in the fiscal framework, it does not only set the scene and context within which the budget is tabled, but it also informs revenue performance, which then also informs spending allocations that come later. So it needs to be looked at in its entirety and in a holistic manner. So in this context, what would be useful, and what was also in the chapter and not presented in the slide, is that we can also consider how the growth projections inform the government's debt consolidation plans. And this is what the analysis looked at. It looked at then, on the one hand, it looked at the accuracy or the reliability of the growth projections, but then it also looked at what was the government's or the budget's debt to GDP ratio projection over the years. And then you see this opposite trend, that National Treasury's debt to GDP ratio appears to be underestimated across many of the years. So not having accurate, or rather reliable, as we know that full accuracy in projections is impossible, but rather what's important is to see an improvement in the fiscal projections is important, even for something as large as managing debt, which impacts the entire fiscal envelope. Again, there was a question on legal mechanisms, and here just to emphasize that the primary legislative and institutional mechanisms at Parliament's disposal in improving transparency of the budget through enhancing credibility and budget fiscal indicators and projections would be rooted in its engagements prior to approving the fiscal framework. And prior to adopting the relevant bills accompanying the budget. And the Commission recognizes that the budget process starts long before the fiscal framework is proposed by the National Treasury. So there are mechanisms in the current budget process that can be perhaps used more effectively. Thank you very much, honourable members. I'll hand over to some of my other colleagues for further insights.
Thank you, Gianni, and thank you, Honourable Chair and honourable members. So I will tackle questions that relate to the chapter on ghost workers and also on guarantees. So what I will start by doing, I'll start just putting down some of the responses for the chapter on ghost workers, and then I'll go over to government guarantees. There was a question that the chairperson asked about the amount of leakages or payroll fraud. So basically what we want to present here, according to our analysis, we see that the variance, on figure 8 on the chapter, basically what we see are variances, right, where actual personal spending consistently breached budgeted allocations as outlined in the E&E. So the variances began at approximately 3.6 million in 2007 and 2008 and escalated sharply to a peak of 33.9 million in 2009 and 10. So following this point, we also saw that there was a little bit of a decline in trend through, decrease into 10.6 million in 2013-14 and reached, a point of 9.8 million in 2018-19. So basically what we see is that such persistent overspending suggests that provincial departments operate with weak expenditure controls and poor forecasting, which erodes budget credibility and places an upward pressure on overall provincial spending. So basically what we want to highlight here is that there are variations that you can rely on to see how much, there are fiscal leakages or how much of a fraud that, the issue of ghost workers can pose to the budget in terms of finances. There was also an issue of from Honourable Swart about how much we can save. And one of the things is that whatever that we lose, if we were to get the measures right, then it's what we can save. So there is also an answer that I want to go for and tackle. So in relation to the integrated platform, there was an issue about the integrated platform. So basically our analysis, the paper shows that government strategies have failed to target the root cause of ghost worker phenomenon. With broad fiscal reviews, likely those conducted by the GTEC, and analyze COEs, but they did not verify the legitimacy of underlying headcount and a critical oversight. So new plans from the DPSA and Treasury, which focuses on verifying staff, linking government database, represent a better or more targeted response, right, and I step in a right direction. However, the success of these initiatives depends on overcoming the very system failures they are trying to fix, such as incompatible computer systems and lack of consequences for those involved in ghost worker schemes. So further to that, we see that tracking ghost workers requires implementing a holistic approach, which is what we spoke about as an integrated approach, grounded in fraud management life cycle theory. This means that building a system that actively prevents fraud, continuously detect it and ensure serious consequences for those involved. For the division of revenue, this means that transfers to provinces should be directly tied to their performance in cleaning up payrolls and adopting a unified anti-fraud systems. This will further turn budget allocations into a tool for enforcing accountability and protecting public funds. So basically what we are saying is that by linking the compliance performance linked funding, the Minister of Public Service and Administration and Finance can help incentivize departments, local governments, as well as state-owned entities to enhance payroll integrity and also the issue in terms of, and also eliminate the issue of ghost workers. So that's one. Those are some of the answers from the issues of ghost workers. Now moving to government guarantees, I think I'll just have a lengthy answer on this. So with government guarantees, we see that, I mean, everything does not, there's nothing that works in silos. As I've heard from Honorable Brits talking about some of the omissions and everything. So basically our recommendations addresses things to show that there's a link between these things. There's also there's a point where budget, how we do a budget is also important. The method of budgeting, is it accrual, is it cash-based, is it that? You look at that, you also look at the legislation that you have in place. What do you have? You have the PFMA, you have the constitution that speaks about guarantees, you have the PFMA, you have treasury regulations. None of those things can work in silos. All of them have to work together. That is the reason why when we start from this, we see that the first question said that the first question as I was to, the first thing that I wanted to address is that what measurable method should be implemented to ensure sustainability with regards to guarantees. So basically what we can look at is that what we look at from this side, we look at that the type of budgeting methods that we have in terms of that. So basically what we looked at, basically what our research or our evidence shows us is that for guarantees that are likely to be called, right? There are countries like the New Zealand, which we did international studies. For guaranteed, this will also answer the question of Honorable Brits about contingent reserves. For guarantees that are likely to be called, they have a high probability and a constructive obligation. So those can be accounted for as provisions in financial statements that are recorded as per the criteria, right? Which states that there is a present obligation which legally or constructive or an outflow will probably, there's an outflow that is probable to settle the obligation and the amount is measurable. Therefore, there are conditions to that. So the New Zealand set aside budget allowances and contingencies while the fiscal strategy report and the policy statement process compels the reporting of the fiscal risks. So however, we see that in South Africa with our budget methods, notwithstanding the methods that we use, and notwithstanding the application of accrual standards issued by done in municipalities, legislatures, and some of the presidents, they are still within the modified cash standard framework. So notably, this does not mean that there is a lack of accrual information in departmental reporting, although assets and liabilities are not recorded in the primary statements and the full double entry accrual system. So therefore, we have information. Therefore, South Africa is not precluded from using the analytical approaches similar to those used in full accrual countries such as the New Zealand to account for guarantees. So again, what we suggest is some of the methods from our recommendation. When you get to our recommendation, I think it's the second one. Yes, the second recommendation says that the National Treasury should ensure that the devised guarantee framework is aligned with international best practice through the introduction of explicit guarantee ceilings, which is what Honorable Brits had highlighted as part of our analysis, that there are no guarantee ceilings that are stated on the PFMA. Furthermore, we'll also see from also National Treasury regulations when I respond to some of the questions. So explicit guarantees ceilings like guarantee to GDP threshold, reserves or contingency funds to prevent unchecked growth of contingent liabilities and mitigate fiscal risk. I remember even Honorable Brice said, does the omission of these things poses, fiscal risks? Yes, they do pose fiscal risks because guarantees as the guarantees accumulate, you continue issuing guarantees to distressed SOEs. This also causes an accumulation of contingent liabilities which lead to unexpected budgetary pressures and also which further encourages market moral hazard. So we see that treating guarantees as off-budget instruments obscures the true fiscal impact and increases the risk of unexpected shocks to public finance. The use of guarantee ceilings will help contain exposure, while reserve funds provide a buffer against the realized risks. Collectively, these measures strengthen fiscal discipline and contribute, to long-term fiscal sustainability. So in terms of the omissions of the PFMA, as I had said, that these things do not work in silos. They are just a combination of legislations and also the methods in which we use. We see that, looking at the National Treasury regulations, another thing that we see is that the regulations lacks a formal criteria. There is no framework. There is no criteria. There are no minimum standards on how to analyze or guide the evaluator in deciding how to give guarantees. That is why our findings show us that guarantees are issued on ad hoc, and that can lead to an increase in guarantees that are issued due to political reasons or sort of those things. So those are some of the answers that we provide, that these things do not work in silos, all of them. So our recommendations are very clear. We need a framework, and we also need methods of budgeting on how to work with guarantees. I think I will leave that for now, Honorable Chair, and hand over to some of my colleagues to respond to their questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Neo. Thank you very much, honorable members, for the questions. I will respond to questions that are relating to the provincial equitable share or chapter 4. Honorable Swart, I think, or let me start with Honorable Ryder, just to try to answer your questions on the phase-in, the impact of the phase-in approach that is being used by the government currently. Then the impact here, honorable members, is that because the socio-economic conditions will determine the shares of that particular province from the funding available from the provincial equitable share, for example. And then if the province doesn't receive all the funding that it should receive in the first year, the assumption is that in most cases, okay, there's two reasons that are being mentioned in the Annexure W. One is that, firstly, you are correct to say is smoothing. Smoothing is one of the reasons. But over and above that, there's an assumption that provinces wouldn't have enough capacity to absorb some additional funding that would be available as a result of the data. But now, on the other side, you find that these provinces are under pressure to spend, but they don't receive what they should receive. And then in that way, then you say that what is happening is financial backlog for that province. And even in the following year, because of changes, instead of implementing what was left in the first year, then population, for example, will change, socioeconomic conditions will change. Then it means that the province would forever have financial backlog and then unable to deliver to its mandate. Yeah, that's the first part. Secondly, there are data issues that Honorable Ryder, you touched on, of which we agree with you that some of the data, for example, we spoke about 2011 census data, which is available data used by the National Treasury, which you correctly said is an issue that should be addressed by STSSA, then we agree with you. Hence, our recommendation speaks to both STSSA with regards to data issues, and then speaks to National Treasury with respect to the implementing, again, those changes instead of doing this phase in, because at the end, of the day, then there will be a financial backlog for provinces. Similar question or related question has been raised by Honorable Swart on whether now considering this data update wouldn't disadvantage some provinces, or will it not be against equitable sharing of resources? Unfortunately, because I think the principle here is to fund the needs, then if some provinces are losing people to other provinces, then pressures are increasing to the receiving provinces. And then it is designed, I think the PS formula is designed in such a way that it would follow where people are. Then there will be provinces that would lose, but not in terms of, because anyway, I've moved from that province to another province, and then the funding would follow. I think that's a principle that is being used here. It would look like maybe the losing province has been disadvantaged, but anyway, because numbers are dictating that way, to say people have moved, and then it will be that case. There's an issue again on constitutional grounds whether provinces that are underperforming shouldn't be penalized by taking or moving funds from those provinces to another provinces to ensure that there's a service delivery. Yes, I think that has been happening. I'll quote, for example, in the HSDG, that is Human Development Grant, where some provinces were underperforming in this grant, the funding that was supposed to address the housing-related issues. There's been that movement or relocation of funding from one province to another to ensure that the service delivery does continue. Though the Commission supports that because funding will be moved within the sector and addressing the challenges in another province within the same sector. But again, I think it has been the position of the Commission that while we are doing that, we need also to go back to the province that is underperforming and understand the reason behind that underperformance, and then try to build capacity, because you are disadvantaging people who are in that province, while this should be balanced. The other question from Honorable Press on the position of the FFC with respect to allocations that are outside the provincial equitable share. In principle, and basically, the provincial equitable share of funding that should go to or flow to provinces through the provincial equitable share basically should be only the funding that is determined by the formula for transparency and to adhere with the principles of the intergovernmental fiscal transfers. So anything else shouldn't happen, but it's happening here. Why? Because there are programs that are being funded through the PS. Then the position of the FFC, I think, is clear in this way, that the FFC wants to keep the provincial equitable share formula transparent, and then only funding determined through the formula should flow through provinces. And then hence one of the recommendations was saying the government should do away with these allocations for other programs which are included in the provincial equitable share allocation but are not determined through the formula. I think that is the position. And again, if you look closer to these programs, some of them have been in the system for more than 8 years. And some of the programs, again, there are other constitutional grants that are in different sectors that are related to these programs. And then it would make sense maybe to ensure that these programs are funded through constitutional grants, which are included in those existing constitutional grants, instead of putting more money or additional funding through the PS, because again, it undermines the principle of transparency and predictability of the formula. I think with that, I will hand over to Nosisa. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sabelo. And thank you, honorable members, for the question. I will respond to two comments. The first comment was made by Honorable Ryder around the issue of 100% spending does not necessarily translate into effective service delivery. So I agree with you there, Honorable Ryder. Expenditure is just an indicator of financial performance, but it does not measure whether the services were delivered efficiently or intended outcomes were achieved. This is precisely why the study included the municipal audit outcome as a governance indicator for our empirical analysis. The clean audits reflect quality of financial management, internal controls and compliance, but they do not necessarily imply service delivery. The empirical findings also showed us that higher fiscal transfers are not significantly associated with either improved audit outcomes or improved service delivery. This suggests that both our spending and governance needs to be complemented by effective implementation and stronger intergovernmental governance arrangement if transfers are not to achieve their intended development impact. And also on the issue that was raised by Honorable Swart around if the funding is an issue or the accountability in South Africa. So I will use the local government as an example and use the findings of our research. The local government crisis is primarily a governance and accountability challenge rather than a simple funding challenge. The empirical analysis shows that higher transfers do not significantly improve service delivery or municipal governance outcome. This suggests that increasing funding alone is unlikely to resolve the current challenges. That said, it is important to also note the study does not suggest the funding is unimportant. Fiscal transfers remain essential for addressing vertical imbalances. This is a reason our study argues that strengthening governance within the intergovernmental fiscal system is critical to ensuring that transfers translate into effective service delivery. Simple increasing funding without addressing governance weaknesses is likely to produce better outcomes. Also, from our analysis of the 1998 white paper, we also found that the developmental vision was supported by fiscal transfers, but relied heavily on cooperative governance mechanism to ensure accountability and effective implementation. And also the section 154 of the Constitution, it makes it clear that municipalities require coordinated support and capacity building from national and provincial governments. This shows that, honorable members, fiscal transfers should be viewed as part of a broader governance framework rather than simple budget allocations. Thank you. I will then hand over to the head of research.
Thank you, Nosisa. Again, coming back to me, I just want to say that in answering one pertinent question from Honorable Swart, should Parliament insist on conditions for these guarantees? Absolutely. In fact, that is was a commitment made during the 6th Parliament, especially when we were dealing with the disbursements for ESCOM. And very explicit, specific conditions. And we're not talking about conditions where you just put a green point or tick next to it and then we call it a day. We're talking about actual units of generated or completion of, at that moment, it was the key was about separating the entities into transmission and generation and so forth. And I think that condition actually and the principle thereof should be applied all and across, including even the adjustments budget principles. Why? Precisely because in our analysis, we found persistent recurring of contradictory budget allocations, meaning such as underspending, but we are giving more money, overspending, but we are cutting, or we say we want to grow the industries for manufacturing or telecommunication, but then let's go hack about 20% off and things like that. And in relation to that is the which again comes to the accountability problem. It's ultimately all and across on fiscal management and governance. It is about discipline, and it is currently South Africa is experiencing a fiscal accountability problem, where these contradictions within the budgeting and budget cycles or budget planning, the desynchronizing of it, is as or built into this complete loss of incentive governance or management, meaning that there is a complete lack of incentive or understanding thereof for any transfers. People don't, or the government doesn't work to, or not incentivized to do the work in delivering services and goods and services to our people. And that needs to be corrected. And we need to fix that with accountability systems, and certainly in some certain cases, as it might call for it, is a independent or a complete or a separate system just to come and correct. For example, wage or ghost workers. One wonders, right? Currently, despite, of course, these validations and verification mechanisms, let's look at then the issue of, for example, Maklanga, right? These people, they've been showing up for work, but has what they were working on working in the benefits of our people? Clearly not. And so there is certainly not just that a system as it currently there is insufficient to ensure effective fiscal to service delivery system translation and mechanisms thereof. I think those, not to belabor the point, I think though various statements or questions asked by honorable chair members, I thank you for very pointing out exactly the issue as we're trying to communicate. For example, that this repeated or unconditioned guarantees create more hazard. Absolutely, things like that. That's I thank you for picking that up, and also that is exactly the purpose in our recommendation for fixing in the reforms in this submission for 27-28. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much, Chen, and the team. Chairperson, as the Commission, I think that covers our submission to yourselves for the 2027-28 Division of Revenue process. We hand over to you, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Team FFC, honorable members, the committee support staff, colleagues from the provincial legislatures. I saw a colleague from National Treasury is also in the meeting. I hope you've taken note of all the submissions that are relevant to your good self, so that by the time we come and engage, you also touch on the issues raised by members. Colleagues, we've had a robust and necessary engagement this morning. And on behalf of the Select Committee on Appropriations, I wish to thank the chairperson of the FFC and the commissioners for your submissions and the frank responses to the questions posed by members. The committee takes its constitutional responsibility seriously, Section 214 and Section 227 are not just technical clauses to us. They are about whether a child in the Eastern Cape gets a textbook, whether a clinic in Limpopo has medicine, and whether a municipality in the Northwest can keep lights on. The division of revenue is the primary tool we have to address equality, deliver services, and ensure fiscal sustainability. Colleagues, we must agree that today's presentation and discussions and several issues that stands out will inform the committee's report to the House. We've touched on issues such as the fiscal transparency and credibility, the contingent liabilities and SOEs, the wage bill integrity, the equitable share data, the service delivery and IGFR, and all issues that have been raised by committees and by committee members. And really, I appreciate the engagement. It's always interesting for us to be with the FFC in our meetings. Before I let all of you leave the platform, colleagues, I'm going to request that members of the Select Committee on Appropriations stays behind for the adoption of previous minutes. We only have one set. But to the FFC, thank you so much for your independent and technical input. Parliament and this committee relies on your advice to ensure that the budget decisions are constitutionally sound, equitable, and sustainable. Therefore, I will allow you to vacate the platform, Team FFC. Members from the provincial legislatures, once again, you are more than welcome to join us in our committee meetings whenever you have space or you have an interest on the topic of discussions for that particular day. Colleagues from the National Treasury and the PBO, thanks once again for your support and for attending this meeting. Good day to your good selves. We'll only allow members of the Select Committee to stay behind. Thank you very much. Mr. Nodada, we only have one set of minutes. Kindly prepare the minutes for the adoption and the consideration of members. And
Thank you very much.
Sure that everybody has vacated, yes, you may proceed, Mr. Nodada.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and good morning once again, honorable members. Chairperson and honorable members, the committee has got one set of minutes that needs to consider. It's dated 24 June 2026. The set is on the screen. This is page 1. On that day, the committee considered the draft report on Appropriation Bill B4 of 2026. We are on page 1. Page 2. Page 3, which is the last page. Thank you, Chairperson. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Nodada. Mr. Majola, Honorable Majola, this is the meeting where you agreed with the whole report besides clause 8 of the recommendations from the committee members. So I would like to see hands that wants to move for the adoption of the minutes. Honorable Ndlovu.
Thanks, Chair. As long as Honorable Majola is covered by the content of the meeting, Chair, I'll move for the adoption of the minutes.
Honorable Ndlovu moves. Honorable Ngumalo.
Thank you very much, Chair. I second the move. Thank you.
And the minutes are therefore duly adopted. Colleagues, let me take this opportunity once again to thank you for joining the meeting, being so interactive with the presentations, and to the support staff of the committee, thanks for the work that you always do to make the committee and members of parliament in this committee to do their work and to shine. Colleagues, I've also noted the presence of some of the PLOs from provinces, thank you very much for joining our meeting. Medano, I have seen you in the meeting, and all other colleagues. This brings us to the end of the meeting. Honorable Numalo, do you have your hand up? Colleagues, this brings us to the end of today's meeting. Thank you very much. We'll meet again next week. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.